They say it started with a child. No one remembers being born. No doctor signed a certificate. No midwife ever came forward. Not even the state had a name on record. But sometime in the winter of 1892, inside a collapsing farmhouse deep in the hollows of eastern Tennessee, a baby let out its first cry, and no one outside that family was supposed to hear it. He was the 8th child, or the 9th, or maybe the 12th. The truth bends in places where the bloodlines run in circles. Locals didn't go near the Miller property, not because they were dangerous, not in the way that people think of danger. It was something else, a feeling more than a fact. They never sold their corn, never came to church, never visited town. It was said that the wind on their side of the ridge smelled strange, that animals wouldn't cross into their fields, that the family had eyes too close together and smiles that never reached them. But what no one knew, what no one could have known, was that by the time the boy turned 12, he had already fathered a child, not out of some act of violence, not even in defiance, but because he didn't know he wasn't supposed to, because the lines between mother and sister and cousin and wife had been erased generations ago. He had been born into a world where the family tree was not a tree at all, just a tangled root system, coiling back in on itself until names lost meaning and faces began to repeat. The girl he fathered, his own brother's mother, depending how you look at it, would never leave that house. Neither would he. There are no school records, no photographs, no birth dates, but their blood still runs through the soil of that land, where the house once stood before it was burned to the ground in 1914 by someone who couldn't stand what they saw inside. Some say the cries heard through the fire were not of people dying, but of something else, being born. A truth, maybe, a curse, or a memory that refuses to be buried. And what you're about to hear was never meant to survive. He was named Levi, but the name was never spoken aloud in town and certainly never written down. In the Miller household, names were more of a convenience than an identity. Most of the children didn't have them until they were 5 or 6. Some were simply called boy, girl, or that one. There was no distinction between sibling and parent, aunt and daughter, uncle and grandfather. The lines had collapsed into one another like rotten timber in an old barn. Levi's mother was also his sister, and the man who raised him had once been his older brother. Levi had pale skin that blistered in the sun, and hair so thin it looked like it had been drawn in by pencil. His eyes were sharp, too sharp, the kind that always looked like they were watching something far behind you. But Levi was quiet, too quiet. He never laughed, never cried, never played with the others, and yet, when the baby came, it was Levi who rocked it to sleep, who fed it, who hushed it when it screamed, who called it mine. No one questioned where the child had come from, because in that house, children just appeared, as if the walls themselves had given birth. There was no ceremony, no announcement, no relief, just another mouth to feed, another name never spoken outside the home. The child had a cleft palate, webbed toes, and a strange fold above his ear, the same one Levi had, the same one Levi's mother had, the same one almost every child in that house carried. It was their mark, the signature of isolation, of a gene pool long since turned stagnant. The neighbors began to whisper. A traveling minister once tried to visit, but left pale and trembling. He claimed he saw a girl on the porch nursing a child that called her sister. He never came back. He told the sheriff something was wrong in that house. The sheriff said he already knew, and that if God hadn't fixed it yet, man shouldn't try. So Levi grew up in a house where mirrors were covered, doors had no locks, and children raised children who looked just like them. He was 12 when he became a father, but in truth, he was already an old man, worn down by a silence passed through generations, the kind of silence that doesn't just haunt a place, it owns it. They kept the baby in the cellar during the day, not because they were ashamed, but because he cried differently. His voice had a hollow, wet sound to it, like a calf choking on afterbirth. The kind of sound that doesn't just echo in your ears, it settles in your bones. They said the light hurt his eyes. They said he had fits when the sun came through the cracks in the wood, but what they never said, what no one dared to say, was that the baby was changing. He didn't crawl like the others had. He dragged one leg behind him. His arms were longer than they should have been, and his teeth came in sharp, too many for his mouth. Levi didn't flinch. He never asked why. He simply held him tighter, as if he could anchor the child to the world by sheer force of will. The rest of the family avoided the cellar. The older children made crosses out of sticks and left them at the door. But Levi, every night, went down with a piece of bread and a handful of lard and fed the child in silence. It wasn't just the baby that was changing. The house began to rot from the inside, boards curled inward, mice left in the hundreds, as if warned of something coming. There was mold on every surface, thick and grey like fog trapped beneath the floorboards. The family stopped sleeping. Shadows moved at night, even when no one stood to cast them. But Levi stayed calm, always calm, until the scratching started. First, beneath the crib, then along the cellar walls, then inside the walls themselves. They said it was just rats. But Levi knew better. He said the baby wasn't alone down there. He said he could hear it talking, not in words, but in hunger. In something older than language, something that came from below the roots. One morning, the baby was gone. No open doors, no broken windows, no footprints, just the crib, empty and full of blood. Levi didn't cry. He just sat down in the corn. Aaron stared at the floor for 3 days. When he finally spoke, all he said was, he went back. No one asked where. No one dared. After the disappearance, Levi stopped speaking altogether, not just to the others, to himself, to the animals, to God. The boy who had fathered his own brother now walked the halls like a ghost, still tethered to his own body. The family went on pretending they hadn't heard the child's cries days after he vanished, pretending they hadn't found claw marks inside the floorboards, pretending they didn't know that something had been born in that house that didn't come from the womb. The land around the property began to die. Not fast, but slow, like a long breath being exhaled over years. Trees leaned away from the house. Grass yellowed and refused to grow. Chickens laid eggs with no shells. Even the wind avoided the place, curling around it like a stream around a stone. Travelers who passed through said the air there felt too still, like the world was holding its breath. But inside the house, life went on. More children, more silence, more twisted branches growing from the same poisoned root. Levi's mother, who might also have been his grandmother, depending on which version of the family story you believed, took to carving symbols into the beams with a rusted nail. No one knew what they meant. Some looked like stars, others like open mouths. She said they kept the old things out. That was the first time anyone had heard her speak in weeks. One night, Levi disappeared too. No one saw him leave. No one heard the door open. His bed was still warm when the others woke. But he was gone, like the baby before him. Like something had called him back to whatever place he had opened when he became a father, too young, too broken, too inside the bloodline to even understand what he had done. The townspeople barely noticed. They'd long since stopped asking questions. Families like the Millers weren't part of their world. They lived on the edge of the known, living reminder of what happens when people retreat too far into themselves, what happens when secrets become scripture, when the past stops being remembered and starts being repeated. And though Levi was gone, the house wasn't empty. It was 2 years before anyone dared step inside. A new sheriff had been appointed, young and proud, full of books and rules and ideas about justice. He gathered 2 deputies and a preacher, and together they rode up to the Miller property on a cloudless morning in May. The house stood crooked on its foundation, the porch sunken like a mouth mid-scream. No birds, no insects, no sound at all. They entered through the back, where the door hung open like it had never been closed. Inside, the air was thick, heavy, not with dust, but with memory. the kind that clings to your skin, the kind that knows you don't belong. The sheriff called out, but there was no reply. The floorboards creaked underfoot, though no one moved. And then the preacher whispered, "The air's wrong." In the kitchen they found bones, small ones, not enough for a full body, but too many to be animal, arranged in a circle on the table, like a ritual unfinished. In the bedroom, dolls made of hair and teeth hung from the rafters, and carved into every wall over and over again. The same words. He went back. In the cellar, they found something else. A crib, untouched by time. Not rotted, not broken, pristine, like someone had placed it there only moments ago. But the moment they saw it, every man stepped backward, because inside the crib was no child, no bones, just a bundle of blankets wrapped tight, and the sound of breathing. The sheriff leaned in, slowly, shaking, and then the bundle moved. They ran, all of them, grown men, armed and sworn to uphold law, driven from the house like children in a nightmare. They never spoke of what they saw. The preacher left town the same week. The deputies drank themselves into silence. The sheriff resigned by winter, but the town remembered. They put up a fence, burned the path leading to the property, told their children it was cursed land, that the ground was bad, that the house had collapsed in a storm, but some say it still stands, still waits, and that at night, if the wind is still, you can hear something breathing beneath the earth, not dead, not alive, just waiting to be born again. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? In the decades that followed, the story of Levi Miller became folklore, the kind passed between old men at barbershops and whispered by school teachers who swore never to repeat it. Most dismissed it as hill gossip, a warning tale to keep girls from wandering too far into the woods. But there were details that never changed, the same names, the same house, the same baby with eyes too wide, and a cry that didn't sound like it came from a human throat. In 1943, a university team from Knoxville came to investigate the area. They weren't looking for horror, just geology, soil studies. But after 3 days, they reported unusual anomalies in magnetic readings near the old Miller site. Their equipment stopped working near the cellar. Compass needles spun. One student claimed he saw movement through the cracks in the floor, but there was nothing there. When the team returned to campus, the report was buried, classified non-relevant. But someone with access, had circled Levi's name in red ink. By the 1970s, the last living Miller cousin was tracked to a psychiatric facility near Asheville. Her name was Ruth, and she refused to speak for the first 10 years of her stay. When she finally did, her first words were, "He still knocks." The doctors assumed it was a delusion, a product of trauma, but one nurse said she saw bruises on Ruth's knuckles, fresh, purple, repeating every 7 days. She died in 1979, and the night she passed, the lights in the entire hospital wing went out for 4 minutes. The backup generators failed, monitors stopped recording, and when the power returned, all of her room's furniture had been pushed to the far wall, as if something had swept through it like wind. The staff buried her with no family present, no visitors, no flowers. But they placed a cross on her grave anyway, not for her, but for themselves, a hedge against something older than fear. Because the story never really ended, it just sank deeper, into dirt, into whispers, into blood. Levi's child may have vanished. Levi himself may have walked off into silence, but their story, their curse, stayed behind. And some say it still lives under that hill, where the trees don't grow and the animals never go, still breathing, still waiting. They bulldozed the land in 1992, not to build anything, just to flatten it, as if the weight of machines and noise could erase what had settled there. Locals said it was about zoning, safety, but those who'd lived long enough knew better. They knew the stories had never stopped. They'd just stopped being told. Hunters spoke of hearing laughter in the fog. Children born with strange deformities in nearby counties were quietly relocated, their files sealed. And once, in 2003, a fire crew responded to reports of smoke on the old Miller property, only to find the earth itself steaming but nothing burning. No records remain of the Miller family, no census, no deeds, no photographs. Just one blurry sepia image found in a lost county archive, a group of children lined up on a porch, their eyes smudged by time. In the center, a boy with arms too long and a stillness that seems unnatural even in stillness. Some say that's Levi, some say it's the brother he fathered. But the image was removed, not by accident, not by nature, by someone who didn't want it seen again. You see, that's how this kind of history ends, not in books, not in museums. It ends in fire, in erasure, in silence so thick even memory bends around it. And yet, here you are, listening, watching, digging in dirt that was meant to stay undisturbed. Maybe you felt it too, that cold behind your eyes as the truth settled in, that this wasn't just one family, that Levi wasn't the beginning, he was just the first crack in a wall that was always going to break, because when blood turns back on itself long enough, it doesn't just breed deformity, it breeds something else, something that remembers. The Miller house is gone, Levi is gone, the child with too many teeth, gone. But stories like this don't need a body to live, they just need a listener, and now that you've heard it, now that you've carried it you into your own quiet places. Don't be surprised if you hear knocking, not loud, not urgent, just soft, familiar. Because sometimes when you stare into the past long enough, it sends something back,